Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to quickly again extend my gratitude to my friend Ben Pearlstein for leading us in Mincha. I love davening with you. Man, I hope we get to do it in person one day soon. And it's really an honor to be marking the end of 5 years of rabbinical study at the seminary today, because it's also an opportunity to mark the ending of what I think is my favorite book, probably, in the Torah, the book of Exodus, with this week's double portion of Vayakel Pekude. The majority of the text reviews how the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was built, and it's a reminder of that structure's significance. Credit is given where credit is due. Metzalel and Oholiav are recognized as the project's foremen, and all of the artisans and members of the Israelite community whose hearts were moved to contribute in some way through gifts of raw materials or whatever skills they had are also acknowledged. And it's an acknowledgement that the work it took to build God's house was strenuous and challenging, but we did it. We did it, and we did it together. But before this summary, before the meat of our Torah reading for this week begins, the opening verses of chapter 35 of Exodus deal with the Sabbath, with Shabbat. And they read, "These are the things that Adonai has commanded you to do. On 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day you shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to Adonai, and whoever does work on it, i.e., on Shabbat, shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on the Sabbath day." So this reminder about the importance of Shabbat comes as the closing bracket on last week's story about the golden calf and the calamity, the failure and embarrassment of that low point in our people's early history. And last week, just before God hands the tablets over to Moses, the ones that God self wrote, God reminds Moses of the importance of Shabbat as an oath, as a sign, Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael, between me and this children, this people Israel, oti le'olam, that the preservation of Shabbat as a distinct and special day is an eternal le'olam marker of Israel's covenantal relationship to God. And after the tablets are recarved by Moses' hand following the drama of the golden calf, we reaffirm our covenantal relationship, and we begin to retell our story with a reminder of the Sabbath's central importance. And as we close the bracket on the golden calf story from last week, and we move back into this relationship, arguably a healthier covenantal relationship with God, we're reminded that the stakes for a person who breaks Shabbat are very, very high. The Hebrew in verse 2 of chapter 35 reads as follows, "Sheshet yamim ta'aseh melacha, uvayom hashvi'i hiye lachem kodesh, Shabbat Shabbaton l'Adonai, kol ha'osevo melacha yumat." And a moment ago, I translated that word, yumat, as it's printed in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, it shall be put to death. And many other translations are similar. They often say things like execute. And translations like this suggest a decisive judgment and a punishment to be carried out by someone or something. But the text is not clear on who or what will carry out that punishment, and nor is it clear, I think more importantly, on when that punishment will come. And that's what I want to focus on. The when. I don't read this verse as expressing a theology of fire and brimstone or a lightning bolt from the sky kind of punishment. That's not the God we're dealing with here. Though essential, I do not believe that the concept of Shabbat is so fragile that it would stir God's rage so much as to strike us down in a vicious and immediate fashion for violating it. And we also know this from our own reality. That's just not how this works. Most of us have broken Shabbat before. Many of you who are watching this Zoom right now would not consider yourselves Shabbat observant, and yet you're still here. So what is it then? I want to read this word more tightly. Let's translate yumat simply as will die. It's a thing that's going to happen. The dying is not yet complete, and we don't know when it will be. I want to parse our understanding of this simpler yumat in three ways. First, the physical, then the spiritual, and finally the in-between. So with the physical, on the surface, there are 6 days in your work week. If you roll into Shabbat, continuing to work on the seventh day, odds are you're just going to keep working with no end in sight. By not giving yourself a frame to stop, you'll wear yourself down. You will work yourself to death. You will die. You must. And let's not forget that the malacha, the work of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, was physical. It was of this layer. It was real labor with direct, visible, tangible impact on the world and the earth on which it stood. And the context for the prohibitions of work in verse 2 is clarified by the rest of our Torah reading this week. This week's text is the baseline for the systems of rules that the rabbis built for what the observance of the Sabbath is supposed to look like. But for those of you who do consider yourselves Shabbat observant, let's pause for a moment. God forbid this text be merely a source material for rabbinic interpretation and halachic development for the 39 categories of prohibited work. I want us to get back to the essence of the thing, because that's what comes first in the text. Not the rules or even the need for rules, but the need to stop. Here, the verse tells us that you will overwork yourself such that you will harm your body. Rest, in this sense, Shabbaton, is not about leisure, but about self-preservation. It's the kind of rest that keeps your body functioning for the 6 days of the week when you need it to do your melacha, your work, a word that in Hebrew, by the way, shares a root with the word for angel, malach. At its core, the root expresses a sense of duty, a need, or a task. Just as the malachim, the angels are messengers of God that are tasked with bringing down revelation and lessons to us, so too our main purpose on this earth is to labor, to make stuff and change the world. The physical world requires a physical body, and we need, all of us need our bodies to function at our best. Shifting for 1 day a week from doing the malacha to welcoming the malachim is essential in preserving our core function. Which brings me to our next point, the spiritual. If you work for 6 days and then you continue to work into the seventh day, perpetuating an endless cycle of work, you're going to dead end, to create a word, yourself to the purpose of your work in the first place. You'll forget, perhaps, why you're doing it at all. This constant pursuit of the next thing, more stuff, more money, recognition, power, status, whatever. That's an endless pursuit. And it's an endless pursuit even if you do keep Shabbat. The world is still spinning. All you're doing is taking yourself out of the rat race for 1 day each week. So why not take the day? We spend 6 days of the week working the world, changing it to suit our needs. And so I ask all of you, when are you going to let the world change you? What day in your week does that happen on? The spiritual risk of not taking specific set-aside time as a Shabbat in our week is that we begin to not care. It becomes harder, perhaps, to struggle with living with a sense of purpose. Shabbat is the reset that can help us retain or regain that sense of purpose, that feeling. Which brings us to the third category, the in-between, feeling, our senses. If you work strenuously for long hours, for many days in a row, your senses will begin to dull. They will die. Your taste buds will weaken, your smell may be blocked, your hearing may fade, your eyes will get tired, they'll struggle to focus. And all of that hampers our being in the physical world and to do the work we need to do, but also it hinders our soul's abilities to be moved, to be inspired. And indeed, inspire shares a Latin construction with breathing in. When you're amazed by something, you go, that sharp intake of breath, that's an inspiration. When your eyes or hands see or touch something, when your ears hear a song, when your tongue delights in tasting a delicious recipe, that short intake of breath lets us know that we are alive. If we smell something beautiful and say, wow, that's amazing, it's not an accident. Reach, the Hebrew word for aroma, and ruach, spirit, are just one vowel away from each other. The senses are the essential bridge between the physical and the spiritual, which are two parts of ourselves that would otherwise be at odds and remain distinct. The physical body needs to be kept alive, and the spiritual self needs to be nourished. So too, the sensory bridge itself needs protection. And, my friends, this is the most fragile layer. It's at the greatest risk of dying, and we're still dying unnoticed. Shabbat is the only thing in our tradition that I think specifically pays attention to the need for protecting this part of what makes us human. The only clear rule of Shabbat in our text for this week is in verse 3 of chapter 35, not lighting a fire. Fire is a thing that we access through all of our senses. We experience its heat by means of touch, either close up, dangerous, or at a distance, very nice. We delight in the sight of it and its light that it gives off. We hear the crackle of the flames or the hissing of a gas fuel line, and by means of smoke, we even smell and taste the thing. We prohibit fire, I think, according to the text, not because fire is going to burn down Shabbat, but so that we can learn to appreciate the power and potential of fire, creation in miniature, anew each week. The fire is a guiding light to illuminate our path into the week ahead and the beautiful work, the malacha, that we'll do there. And Havdalah, as a ritual, amplifies this. We have blessings, brachot, for tasting the wine, for smelling the spices, for feeling the heat, for seeing the light and hearing the sizzle of Shabbat's end. It's a process of reawakening and resetting our sensory bridges so it can hold us together as whole humans in the new week. Preserving the Sabbath is about preserving that which makes us us. And sure, there are lots of ways to give your life meaning. But Exodus was a book about a free people becoming a nation. And if you consider yourself a part of that nation, I hope you understand what our nation's tradition can teach us about being human. And for me, being human is split into those three categories: the physical, the spiritual, and the sensory bridge in between. We are each responsible for all three of those things, and 6 days a week, we push them to their limits. We owe it to ourselves to take better care of us and of each other. Kadishta Rabbanan is found on page 13 in Sidor Sim Shalom. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah. B'alma divrach kirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael b'agala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yesh shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'lalmei al-maya. Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitramam v'yitnasei v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudsha b'richu. Le'ila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Talmideon v'al kol Talmidei Talmideon v'al kol man de'oskin b'oraita div yatra hadein v'div v'chol atar v'yatzar yeh lohon u'lechon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichim u'znei rivicha u'forkana min kadam avon v'shmaya v'imru amen. Yesh shlama rabba min shmaya v'chayim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who makes peace in high places make peace for us, for all Israel, and for all humanity. Oseh shalom bimromav, uyaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru. Amen.